They tell you gold is the safe play, the thing your grandfather would have done, the metal that survived empires, wars, inflations, a collapse of currencies no one remembers anymore. And maybe that's true. Maybe gold is safety, but safety from what exactly? Because the Amish aren't buying gold. They never have. And they've survived every financial crisis you can name without touching a single ounce of it. This isn't about religion. It's not about buggies or bonnets or rejecting modernity for its own sake. It's about what happens when a group of people builds an economic system so fundamentally different from yours that their idea of wealth doesn't even register in your framework. And once you see what they're doing, you realize the thing you've been calling safety might actually be the opposite. Gold is a bet. You know this already, even if you don't say it that way. You're betting that when everything else fails, someone will still want what you're holding, that the consensus around value will hold, that in a crisis, a bar of metal will be more useful than whatever else you could have owned. It's not a terrible bet. It's just not the only one. And it's not the one the Amish are making. The Amish are buying something else, something you can't store in a vault or trade on an exchange, something that doesn't glitter and doesn't have a ticker symbol. They're buying optionality in a world where your options are narrowing faster than you think. And the gap between their strategy and yours is the gap between what you think you need to survive and what you actually need. Start with the obvious question. What does gold do? It sits, it waits, it holds value, theoretically, because human beings have agreed for thousands of years that it holds value. It doesn't rust, it doesn't decay, it doesn't feed you or shelter you or keep you warm. It does nothing except exist in a form that people have historically been willing to exchange for things that do matter. That's the whole game. You convert your labor, your time, your dollars into this inert object, and you hope that when you need to convert it back, the exchange rate is in your favor. The Amish aren't playing that game. They're not converting anything into a static store. They're building systems, and systems, unlike gold, compound. They create new capacity. They generate options you didn't have before. A horse isn't like a bar of gold. A horse eats. A horse requires care. A horse can die. But a horse can also pull a plow, and a plow can turn dirt into food. And food is a thing gold can't create. You can't eat gold. You can't plant it. You can't breed it. All you can do is hope someone else still wants it when you need to trade it away. This is the first crack in the logic. Gold is a claim on future human consensus. The Amish hedge is a claim on future physical capacity. One depends on belief. The other depends on biology and physics. And in a real crisis, the difference matters more than you think. You already know this, somewhere. You've seen the movies. You've read the books. When everything falls apart, the guy with the gold gets robbed. The guy with the farm survives. It's a cliche because it's true, but you still buy gold because buying a farm seems impossible. The Amish buy the farm, or more precisely, they buy the capacity to run a farm without the grid, without fuel, without supply chains, without any of the systems you assume will always be there. They're not preppers. They're not survivalists. They're just structured in a way that makes your dependencies look like liabilities. Now think about what a dependency actually is. It's a point of failure you've outsourced. Every time you rely on something outside your control, you're trading autonomy for convenience. That's fine when the systems work. It's catastrophic when they don't. Your wealth, if it's in gold, is entirely dependent on a functioning market for gold. Someone has to want it. Someone has to be able to authenticate it. Someone has to have something you want in exchange for it. If any of those links break, your gold is just a heavy rock. The Amish don't have that problem because their wealth isn't in objects. It's in relationships and skills and infrastructure that function independently of whether anyone else is functioning. You can call that community. That's the word people use when they don't want to confront what it actually means. Community isn't warmth and potlucks and people who wave at you. Community, in the Amish sense, is a distributed risk management system. When your barn burns down, the community rebuilds it, not because they like you, because the system only works if everyone's productive capacity is maintained. You can't freeload because freeloading gets you shunned. You can't opt out because opting out means losing access to the entire network. It's harsh, it's also efficient, and it scales in a way gold doesn't. Gold scales down. In a crisis, you shave off pieces of your bar and trade them for food, for medicine, for safety. Every transaction depletes you. The Amish system scales up. In a crisis, the network gets stronger because mutual dependence increases and everyone has an incentive to contribute more, not less. Your gold might buy you 6 months. Their system has bought them 3 centuries. That's not luck, that's design. But here's the part that makes you uncomfortable. You can't buy your way into that system. You can't purchase Amish optionality the way you purchase a Krugerrand. It requires something you're not willing to give up, which is the illusion of independence. You think you're independent because you have money, because you can buy what you need, because you're not beholden to your neighbors or your family or anyone else. The Amish know that's a fiction. Your independence is just dependence on a very long supply chain. And supply chains break. This is where the gap widens. You're optimizing for individual survival. They're optimizing for collective resilience. You think those are the same thing. They're not. Individual survival assumes you can outlast the crisis alone, that your resources will carry you through until normalcy returns. Collective resilience assumes normalcy isn't coming back, and the only way through is cooperation with people who have skills you don't have and resources you can't replicate. One strategy works in a short disruption. The other works in a long one. Guess which kind of crisis we're more likely to face. The world is not getting simpler. It's getting more complex, more connected, more fragile. Every new efficiency is a new vulnerability. Just-in-time supply chains mean there's no slack in the system. A single choke point, a single failure, cascades instantly. The Amish built slack into everything. They overproduce food. They maintain skills that seem redundant. They keep horses even though tractors are faster, because horses don't need diesel and can be bred and don't require a global supply chain to repair. That redundancy looks wasteful until it's the only thing that works. You can see this in how they handle technology. They don't reject it. They evaluate it. They ask whether it increases dependence or increases capacity. A solar panel increases capacity. You can generate power without relying on the grid. That's acceptable. A smartphone increases dependence. It requires cell towers, electricity, rare earth minerals, a functioning internet, a company that stays in business. That's unacceptable. It's not about morality. It's about sovereignty. Every piece of technology they adopt has to pass a test. Does this make us more vulnerable or less? Your portfolio doesn't pass that test. Gold doesn't pass that test, because gold only has value in a world where markets still function, where people still agree on what money is, where you can find someone who has food and is willing to trade it for metal. The Amish don't need that world. They built a parallel economy that works whether yours does or not, and that's the hedge. Not against inflation, not against currency collapse, against the possibility that all your abstractions stop functioning at once. Think about what happens when the abstractions fail. You can't eat a stock certificate. You can't burn a Bitcoin for warmth. You can't plant gold and harvest food. All of those things are claims on future systems. The stock is a claim on corporate earnings. The Bitcoin is a claim on network consensus. The gold is a claim on market liquidity. If the systems collapse, the claims become worthless. The Amish don't hold claims. They hold capacity. A field that grows food, a horse that works, a skill set that produces value without electricity, without diesel, without inputs from a globalized economy. That capacity doesn't depend on anyone believing in it. It just works. And this is where you start to realize the belief you've been sold isn't about gold. It's about fungibility. The idea that everything can be converted into everything else, that value is universal, that if you just have enough of the right kind of money, you can buy your way into or out of any situation. That belief works in stable times. It fails in transitions. Because in a transition, the things that matter aren't the things you can trade. They're the things you can do. The skills you have, the relationships you've built, the systems you understand, and none of those are for sale. The Amish understand this intuitively. You don't learn their skills in a weekend seminar. You don't buy your way into their community with a donation. You earn it over years, decades, by proving you're willing to carry weight, by showing you understand the stakes, by demonstrating that you're not just trying to extract value, but contribute it. That's the filter. It's brutal, but it works. It keeps out the people who would drain the system. It keeps in the people who make the system stronger. You're not in that system, and you can't get into it by buying gold. You might be able to get into it by buying land, by learning skills, by building relationships with people who know how to produce food and build structures and repair tools without Home Depot. But that's not a financial transaction. That's a life restructuring. And most people won't do it because it requires admitting that the life they've built is fragile in ways they don't want to confront. So you buy gold instead. Because gold feels like action. It feels like preparation. It feels like you're doing something. And maybe you are. Maybe in a minor currency crisis, a short-term inflation spike, a temporary loss of confidence, gold holds value and you come out ahead. But in a real collapse, the kind where trucks stop running and grocery stores go empty and the grid goes dark, gold is just another abstraction. The Amish hedge isn't an abstraction. It's a farm that feeds people. It's a workshop that repairs equipment. It's a community that doesn't need the outside world to function. You think you can't replicate that. You're probably right. But you could move in that direction. You could reduce your dependencies. You could learn skills that produce value without electricity. You could build relationships with people who have those skills. You could buy land that grows food instead of gold that sits in a safe. You won't, though, because the cost is too high. Not the financial cost, the psychological cost. Admitting that your wealth might be worthless, that your career might be irrelevant, that the systems you've spent your life mastering might not matter in the world that's coming. The Amish already paid that cost. They paid it 300 years ago when they walked away from modernity and built something else. And what they built is the thing you're starting to realize you need. Not gold, not money, not claims on future systems, but actual, physical, undeniable capacity to meet your own needs without depending on the fragile machinery of a globalized economy. This is what the gold merchants don't tell you. They sell you safety, but what they're really selling you is a more elegant form of dependence. You're still depending on the system. You're just depending on a different part of it. The part that says gold will always be valuable, that markets will always exist, that someone will always trade you food for metal. The Amish don't depend on that. They depend on soil and sun and rain and the willingness of their neighbors to show up when the work needs doing. One of those dependencies has lasted for millennia. The other has existed for maybe a century, and it's already showing cracks. You can feel the cracks. That's why you're here. That's why you're thinking about gold in the first place, because something feels wrong. The system feels unstable. The future feels uncertain, and you want to protect yourself. But protection isn't about owning the right asset. It's about reducing your vulnerability. And you can't reduce your vulnerability by buying something. You can only reduce it by changing how you live. The Amish changed how they live, radically, completely, in ways you're not willing to change. But you could change a little. You could learn to garden. You could learn to preserve food. You could build relationships with people who know how to fix things. grow things, make things. You could move somewhere with water and arable land. You could reduce your financial overhead so you're less dependent on a paycheck. None of that is as simple as buying gold. All of it is more useful. And here's the thing that should terrify you. The Amish aren't doing this because they're scared. They're doing it because it works. Because they've been through every crisis you can imagine and come out fine. Because their system is anti-fragile. It gets stronger under stress. Yours gets weaker. Your wealth is in assets that only have value in stable conditions. Their wealth is in systems that thrive in chaos. When supply chains break, they don't notice. When the grid fails, they don't care. When currencies collapse, they keep farming. You notice. You care. Your entire life is built on the assumption that the systems will hold. And maybe they will. Maybe the grid keeps running. Maybe the supply chains recover. Maybe the dollar stays stable and gold stays valuable and you get to retire in comfort. But maybe not. And if not, the Amish are fine. You're not. That's the hedge, not the metal. The optionality, the capacity to function when the systems you rely on stop functioning. And you can't buy that capacity. You can only build it. Slowly, painfully, by making choices that feel like sacrifices until the day they feel like survival. You already know this. Somewhere deep, beneath the rationalizations and the comfort and the belief that things will work out, because they always have, you know that the world the Amish are preparing for is more likely than the world you're preparing for. And you're buying gold anyway, because buying gold doesn't require you to change. It just requires money, and money is the one thing you have. Until you don't.